Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, chapter, I believe, 23. Let me check again. Yeah, I'm going to be reading chapter 23. If you haven't seen chapter 22 yet, I'll link it in the description down below. Let's get started. Chapter 23. Minli and the king walked through the garden, and she told him her name and where she was from, and about her journey. Remembering the fish's warning, she carefully didn't mention Dragon waiting for her in the forest. As they walked, the patterned stone pathways gently massaged her feet, and the sun seemed to disappear, like a closing flower. When they finally approached the pavilion, night had fallen. "So," the king said, "now you have come here to find the guardian of the city?" "Yes," Minli said, and looked at him expectantly. "And you think the guardian is me?" the king said. "Yes," Minli said. "Do you know what the borrowed line is?" "May I have it?" "The borrowed line," the king repeated, and they stopped in front of the pavilion. The moon's reflection fastened into the water's surface, and Minli saw why the pavilion was called Clasping the Moon. The image of the moon lay protected in the water like a glowing pearl, and the king stared at it deep in thought. "Come, let's eat, and then we'll see what can be done with our borrowed line." Minli entered the open-air pavilion. At the center, two stools and a small table of elaborately carved ginkgo wood waited for them. A large, finely woven bamboo basket as tall as Minli's waist stood next to the chairs. The king eagerly lifted off its lid, and rich, warm amoras floated in the air, making Minli's stomach grumble. The king took out the plates of delicate pink shrimp, dumplings, and savory noodles and pork, dragon's beard, bean sprouts, emerald city chives, and bowl of white jade tofu soup. A pot of tea and an assortment of cakes sat on the bottom layer of the basket to finish off the dinner. So here's the picture of them at the garden. The king handed Minli a pair of Eradicate gold chopsticks that weighed heavily in her hands, and with his urging, Minli began to eat what was easily the most delicious meal she had ever had. "I'm not sure what the borrowed line is that you are looking for," the king told Minli as he sipped his tea. They had finished eating the main meal, and she was enjoying a turtle-shaped cake filled with sweet and soft red bean paste, a taste not known to her before. As she swallowed, the richness seemed to warm her from her throat to her stomach. "But I think I can guess." With great effort, Minli stopped eating and looked at him. "You can?" she asked, and suddenly a hope filled her. "What do you think it is?" "Do you know why the city is called the City of Bright Moonlight?" the king asked. Minli shook her head. "My great-great-grandfather changed the name of the city. It used to be called the City of Far Remote, but after he came to power, he changed it to City of Bright Moonlight," the king said. "Most people thought it was because it had a poetic heart, but it was more than that." "Have you heard of the story of the magistrate that tried to outwit the Old Man of the Moon?" Minli nodded. "He tried to kill his son's destined wife, but then ended up together anyway." "Ah, you know the story," the king smiled. "That magistrate was my great-great-grandfather's father, and this is a city that his son became king of throughout the marriage." "So the story is real," Minli said. "Well, it is a story that has been passed throughout my family for generations," the king said, "but there's more to it than what most have heard. The unknown part of the story of the Old Man of the Moon." After the Old Man of the Moon told the magistrate that his son would marry the daughter of a grocer, Magistrate Tiger flew into a rage. With both hands, he grabbed the page and tore it from the book. But before he could rip the page in two, the old man's eyes stared into his, and the light of the moon seemed to bind the magistrate still. As the silence hung in the air, Magistrate Tiger's anger turned to fear. But finally, the Old Man of the Moon nodded at him grimly. "Pages of the Book of Fortune do not tear easily, but that paper was being sent to you before I borrowed it," the old man said. "So perhaps it is only fitting that you finally receive it. Take it. The book has bestowed some extra qualities to it, though they will be useless to you as the original paper would have been. And without another word, the old man of the moon stood up and walked away up the mountain. The magistrate could do nothing but stare, clutching the ripped paper in dumbfounded silence. He tore a page out of the Book of Fortune, Minli said. Yes, the king said, but he, himself, was never able to read it. So it remained useless to him, just as the old man of the moon said it would be. Come, the king said, as he walked out of the pavilion onto the bridge under the moon. As Minli followed, he reached inside the breast of his shirt, slowly took out a gold-threaded pouch, and said, "This is the ripped page. It has passed down from generation to generation, studied by the kings of the city of bright moonlight. None of us have ever understood what the old man of the moon meant when he said it was borrowed." Minli watched fascinated as the king took from the gold pouch a delicate folded piece of paper, paler than even the white jade tofu she had eaten for dinner. Even the white jade tofu she had eaten for dinner. The paper seemed to have a light of its own, dimming the gold thread of the pouch that held it. "It was my great-great-grandfather," the king said, unfolding the paper, who realized that the words on it can only be seen in the bright moonlight. He renamed the city of bright moonlight, as a reminder for the king that followed him. Minli looked at the paper in a daze. In the moonlight, the page glowed. A single line of faint words, as if written with shadows, was scrawled upon the page in language Minli had never seen. "So I think this paper, which the old man of the moon said he borrowed," the king said, "this written line torn from the Book of Fortune is the borrowed line you seek?" "Of course," Minli said, and excitement bubbled inside of her. "It must be." But her excitement popped as she looked at the carefully preserved page and remembered how the king had had it on his person, carefully and preciously, kept in the pouch around his neck. It seemed impossible that he would give her such a cherished treasure. It was only after much study that the great-great-grandfather was able to decipher the words, the king said, and it is when he realized that the words change according to the situation at the time. From then on, whenever a king of the city of bright moonlight had problems, he consults to the paper. "And it tells you what to do?" Minli asked. "Yes," the king said. The king gave a wormy smile. "Though not the way you think. Sometimes the line on the paper is more mysterious than the problem." And with that, the king looked down at the line. As he read, a startled expression came across his face. "What does it say?" Minli asked. The king said slowly, "You only lose what you cling to." The king's words seemed to hang in the air, as all was silent, except for the soft rustling of the page and the gentle breeze. Minli, unable to speak, watched it flutter as if it were waving at her. "So, it seems your request," the king said, "deserves consideration. The line tells me as much. Let me think." Minli looked at the king, quiet but puzzled. "For generations, my family has prized this paper. We have honored it with its spiritual power and authority. It has been passed on and studied and cherished and revered. It has been valued above gold or jade." The king slowly said, "But what is it, really?" Minli shook her head, unsure if she should respond. "It is actually," the king said, "simply a proof of my ancestor's rudeness, his unprincipled anger and ruthless greed. Yet we disregarded that. Instead, we guard and protect this written line so dearly that the rulers of the city of bright moonlight carry it at all times, not daring to let it out of their possession." The moon seemed to tremble as ripples spread over its reflection caught in the water. The king continued again, speaking more to himself than to Minli. "We have clung to it, always afraid of losing it," the king said. But if I choose to release it, there is no loss." Minli left her breath freeze in her chest. She knew the king's mind was in a delicate balance. If he refused to give her the line now, she knew she would never get it. And perhaps it was never meant for us to cling to. No matter whom the paper originally belonged to, this is a page from the Book of Fortune, a book that no one owns, the king said. So perhaps it is time for the paper to return to the book. A wind skimmed the water, and Minli could see her anxious face, as pale and as white as the moon reflected in it. You only lose what you cling to, the king repeated to himself. He glanced again at the paper and then looked at Min Li. A sincere expression settled on his face, and then he quietly smiled and said, "So, by choosing to give you the line, I do not lose it." And with those words, he placed the paper in Min Li's trembling hands. That was the end of chapter 23. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Give this video a like and subscribe down below. Bye!